The first time I heard him humming in the hallway, I thought it was my own mind playing tricks on me. Finding housing in Chicago in the summer of 2022 felt like walking blindfolded through a maze with knives for walls. I had just graduated nursing school, landed a job at Northwestern Memorial, and all I could see were numbers. Student loans swelling like tumors, my new salary already bleeding out into rent, groceries, and transit. I told myself I'd take anything safe, anything cheap, anything that wouldn't drain me before the first month's paycheck cleared. That's when I saw the Craigslist ad. Furnished room in quiet neighborhood. Utilities included. $600 a month. Too good to be real, but the photos gleamed. Sunlight on hardwood, white curtains, a neatly made bed in a room that felt like it was waiting for me. The owner, Carl, responded to my email in minutes. His replies were short, professional. He told me he worked in IT from home, liked renting to medical workers, trusted them. His voice over the phone was low, almost soothing, with that practiced calm some men use to sound reliable. The day I moved in, he greeted me in khakis and a button-down shirt, glasses perched on a face that could have been anyone's, thinning brown hair, pale skin that blushed easily when he smiled. He helped with my boxes, pointed out the bathroom schedule, the laundry in the basement, the shelf where he kept towels. The house smelled faintly of pine cleaner, but under it, something else, like old paper left in a damp room. The books on, his shelves were perfectly aligned, spines facing forward, alphabetized. His towels were folded in exact squares. It was immaculate in a way that felt less like cleanliness and more like compulsion. The first week passed without incident. Carl stayed in his office most days, surfacing for meals, asking how my shifts were. His friendliness seemed harmless. Maybe he was just lonely, but I noticed small things. The way he paused when I spoke on the phone in the kitchen as though waiting for me to finish so he could echo it back later. The way he tilted his head when I laughed at something on my laptop, as if memorizing the rhythm. One night, after a 12-hour shift, I came home, microwaved leftovers, and put in earbuds to drown the day out. I had a ritual, the same playlist I'd used since nursing school, songs that carried me through studying, exams, the nights when I felt hollowed out by loss. As I lay in bed half asleep, I heard it, a voice in the hallway, low, off-key, humming the same song I'd just finished listening to. I sat up fast, earbuds tugging out. The house went silent. I told myself it was a coincidence, that maybe he liked the same band. But the next night it happened again. A different song, one I hadn't played in years, an old track I used to listen to while cramming anatomy notes. And when I answered a call from my sister the next day, I caught Carl in the kitchen, smiling as he buttered toast. "You really shouldn't let her guilt you about family dinners," he said casually, finishing the thought I'd been whispering into the phone seconds earlier. The bread stuck in my throat. I laughed it off, told myself maybe I'd spoken louder than I thought. But the unease bloomed in me, quiet and constant like a low-grade fever. The second week, the invitations began. Dinner, a boat tour, coffee downtown. Each time I declined exhaustion or exams as excuses. His smile grew tighter, his voice more clipped. Then the notes started. Noise after 10 p.m. disrupts the household. Good roommates are considerate. No late-night phone calls. Bonding is part of coexistence. Yellow highlighter across phrases taped to the fridge, slipped under my door. The house began to feel like a pressure chamber. At work, I found myself thinking about my patients, men and women describing phantom sensations, auditory hallucinations, paranoia no one believed. One woman clawed her arms raw, swearing she felt insects under her skin. Another heard her abuser's voice in the walls. I started scratching without noticing. My forearm, the back of my neck, my thighs under scrubs. Itching that had no source. By the third week, I couldn't tell if my paranoia was rooted in him or in myself. Carl began correcting my sentences mid-speech like he already knew where I was going. He muttered phrases under his breath as he passed me in the hall, fragments of things I'd whispered into my pillow at night. The lock on my door felt inevitable. When I installed it, his silence afterward was thunderous. The slam of cabinets, the stomp of feet. That night at 2:47 a.m., he rattled the knob, then knocked. "We need to talk about the lock." His words were slurred with alcohol, but what chilled me wasn't his demand, it was what followed. "This is my house. My property. I hear everything, you know." The emphasis wasn't on property. It was on here. The next morning he was in the kitchen as if nothing had happened. Shirt crisp, hair combed, coffee mug waiting. "Sorry if I was loud. Book club got a little rowdy," he said, eyes fixed on me. Behind him, near the outlet above the counter, I noticed a device. White plastic, small like a cheap plug-in. Not an air freshener, no scent. Just a tiny mesh grill on the front like the mouth of something that listens. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee them. In the living room, in the hallway, at the top of the stairs. Every outlet seemed to hold one. I Googled in my room. Door, locked, curtains drawn. Covert listening devices disguised as outlets. The results chilled me. High-gain microphones, some powerful enough to pick up whispered conversations through walls. Some with data storage, others transmitting live audio to a phone. That night I lay awake, hearing my own breath as though it wasn't mine, as though someone else was breathing with me. I had to know. When Carl went on one of his supposed grocery runs, I crept into the basement. The storage bin was behind boxes of cleaning supplies. Inside, not cameras, but stacks of audio drives. Each labeled with a woman's name and dates: Ashley, Jenna, Diane. Handwritten notes on index cards. Whispers in sleep. Declined invitations. Increasing resistance. Too loud at night. Difficult to manage. At the bottom, a folder with applications. Each woman's profile printed, annotated. My own on top. And beneath that, a USB drive labeled "The Next Patient." I plugged it into my laptop with shaking hands. Inside, folders of names, recordings of laughter, sobbing, phone, calls, even faint breathing. And at the end, one new folder. My name. Today's date. Empty. Waiting. I barely slept after that night. Every creak in the walls felt like a whisper. Every soft shuffle from Carl's side of the apartment made my muscles tighten, my breath catch. At school, I tried to throw myself into clinicals, into the endless reading and patient rounds, but my focus was shredded. Even when I leaned over an elderly patient with dementia, her papery hand clutching mine, her voice whispering about the men who stand at the foot of her bed, I found myself flinching hearing Carl in her. Sometimes, when I walked down the sterile hospital hallway, I thought I caught the faintest echo of humming. My skin prickled. I scratched at my arm so much that by the end of the week I had angry red welts as if I'd walked through poison ivy. When the supervising nurse asked if I was okay, I muttered about stress allergies. I couldn't say the truth, that I felt like sound itself was crawling under my skin. At night I tried music. Old playlists, familiar voices. Sometimes soft, sometimes loud. Once I fell asleep to a song my mom used to play while cleaning the house. Something private that I hadn't shared with anyone. The next morning, as I shuffled into the hallway to get the mail, Carl was unlocking his door. His head tilted, and in the faintest hum, flat, almost mechanical, he began the melody. My chest seized. He shouldn't know that song. He didn't even glance at me. He just stepped out, humming, the sound disappearing down the stairwell like a hook dragging my insides with it. I stopped listening to music in the apartment, stopped talking on the phone too. Every word felt stolen, like it had been lifted out of the air before it even reached the other person. When my best friend Janelle called, I panicked, walking outside into the cold night just to whisper. Even then, a floorboard creaked above me. By the time I finally went to Mrs. Peterson, I was ragged, skin raw from scratching. She opened her door with that same plastered smile she wore when collecting rent. "Sweetheart, you're looking tired," she said. Her eyes, though, were cool. "What's wrong?" "It's Carl," I blurted. He listens. He repeats things I've said, things I haven't told anyone. I think he has microphones or something. Please, you have to do something." Her face didn't change. She just pursed her lips, then sighed, like I was telling her the sink was dripping. Again. "Carl's peculiar," she said, lowering her voice like she was sharing gossip. "But he's lived here for years. Pays on time, he's harmless." "Harmless," I snapped. "He's in my walls, he's listening to me." For a split second her eyes flickered, not with shock, but with something harder. Annoyance, maybe, even calculation. Then she leaned closer, her perfume cloying her smile back in place. "Maybe you should focus on your studies, honey. Don't let yourself get carried away with fantasies." I should have known something was wrong the very first night, when the laughter from the living room felt just a little too warm, too rehearsed, as though the walls themselves were listening. But it took years before I understood how unsafe I had been, and even then, I'm not sure if the danger ever truly ended. I was 31, a licensed clinical therapist by trade, someone trained to recognize red flags in human behavior. My job was to untangle the manipulations of others, to draw invisible boundaries for people who had none. Clients told me I could see through them. That was supposed to be my strength. But I've learned that it's hardest to read the script when you've been written into it. That spring, I was living in a narrow 2-story rental on Maplebridge Avenue, a quiet residential street where the trees bloomed white and pink like watercolor. I'd taken the house with my sister Natalie and her fiancé Josh after my divorce. They wanted extra hands with rent, and I wanted a new place, some clean air to breathe. Josh was a pragmatic guy, Natalie steady and protective. Together we decided to bring in 2 more roommates to make things affordable. That's how Ethan and Mara came into our lives. They were a couple in their late 20s, well-dressed in a low-key way, with soft smiles and easy banter. Ethan worked in IT, Mara as a graphic designer, or so they said. They toured the house one Sunday afternoon, moving through the kitchen and hallways like they'd always belonged there. They laughed at Josh's jokes, asked Natalie about her job, and complimented my framed diplomas hanging over the stairs. "You're a therapist?" Ethan said, tilting his head with interest. "That's actually perfect. Every house needs one, right? Built-in conflict resolution." We all laughed. It felt disarming. Safe. That night we agreed they could move in. For the first month they were model roommates. They cooked dinner for everyone, played board games, made sure the trash was taken out. Mara had a way of leaning forward. When you spoke, her eyes wide with interest, like every word mattered. Ethan was helpful, fixing little things before anyone even asked. He'd say things like, "Already noticed the hinge squeaking, tightened it for you," or, "Your Wi-Fi wasn't secure, so I updated the router password." At the time, it felt generous, thoughtful. Looking back, I see it differently. It started small. They asked me about work, curious about the stories I carried. I couldn't share client details, of course, but Ethan pressed, "What's the worst thing someone's ever confessed? Do you ever feel afraid of them? Do you think you could tell if someone was lying to you right now?" I laughed it off. "Therapist or not, I'm just a person. People surprise me all the time." Mara touched my hand and said, "But not us, right?" We all laughed again, but my hand was cold when I pulled it back. The real shifts came slowly, in patterns so subtle I didn't notice them stacking up. Ethan somehow knew my streaming passwords before I shared them. Mara remembered tiny details I'd mentioned only once, things like my high school mascot or the name of my first dog. They asked about my family, my ex-husband, the fights that led to my divorce. It seemed casual, over wine or dinner, but I realized one night they knew more about me than Natalie did. They were collecting me. The first time I felt it in my body was in May. I'd been working late on session notes in Josh's office when I heard laughter from upstairs, too soft, too muffled. I went to pour tea in the kitchen and stopped. In the half-lit living room, Ethan and Mara sat together on the couch, their laptop open. On the screen I caught a glimpse of text, my name, my clients, notes I hadn't backed up yet. They looked up too quickly, closing the laptop in one motion. "Late night?" Ethan asked smoothly. "Yeah," I said, throat dry. Mara smiled. We're just looking at old emails. I nodded, forcing a smile, but inside alarm screamed. That night, I locked the office door for the first time. Natalie noticed my unease. "You okay?" she asked one morning over coffee. "Yeah," I lied. But Brian, another roommate we'd briefly had before Ethan and Mara, once told me, "You trust too easily. You want to see the best in people, even when they're showing you their worst." His words came back like an echo. By June, Ethan and Mara's friendliness had taken on a sharper edge. They teased me about things I'd never told them, lines from my private journal, half-formed thoughts I kept on a locked phone. "You're always double-checking windows," Ethan said one evening, his tone light, but his eyes unblinking. "Is that because of your father? The way he used to leave the doors open?" My stomach dropped. I had written that. Only once. Only in a private note. I wanted to confront them. But how? Accuse them of reading my mind? Instead, I began noticing the house itself. The air felt heavy. Corners darker than they should be. Pipes rattled when no one used the water. Once I heard whispering near the office window, only to find no one outside. I told myself it was stress. Projection. But part of me wondered if the house was listening, if it carried every secret spoken within its walls. The escalation came in July. Natalie had gone away for the weekend with Josh. I was home alone with Ethan and Mara. They suggested a movie night. Halfway through, Mara leaned close and whispered something so faint I almost missed it. "We know what you're afraid of." I froze. "What?" Ethan laughed, turning up the volume. "She's messing with you. Don't mind her." But Mara's eyes stayed on me, wide and unblinking. That night, I dreamed of the office door slowly creaking open, the sound of someone breathing in the dark. When I woke, my phone was unlocked on the nightstand. I began searching their room when they were gone. It was risky, stupid, but I had to know. What I found wasn't clothes or drawings. It was folders, printed copies of my emails, screenshots of therapy notes, transcriptions of conversations I'd had on the phone. They had been listening, recording, cataloging. One folder was labeled with my name, another with Natalie's. Inside Natalie's, her bank logins, her old love letters, photos from her phone. That's when I realized it wasn't just me. I confronted Natalie when she got back. She wanted to throw them out immediately, but Josh hesitated. "We don't want trouble," he said. "If we push too hard, they'll push back harder." But trouble was already in motion. The cameras Josh had installed months before, small, motion-triggered, began showing odd clips. Ethan moving through the hall at 3 a.m., stopping at each door, listening. Mara standing in the kitchen in the dark, whispering to someone who wasn't there. Then one night, while reviewing the footage, Josh froze. He rewound, played it again. It showed Ethan in the basement, behind the breaker panel, pulling away a section of drywall. Inside, a nest of wires and hidden cameras, dozens of them, pointed into every room. Some we hadn't even noticed. When they confronted Ethan and Mara, the couple didn't deny it. Ethan smiled faintly. "It's not surveillance if you live here, it's just knowing." Mara added softly, "You let us in. We only took what you gave. We should have called the police. We should have screamed." Instead, stunned silence filled the room. That night I tried to sleep but couldn't. Every creak of the house felt like someone leaning closer. Every shadow on the wall felt like Mara's eyes. The final confrontation came a week later. I woke at 2:30 a.m. to the sound of voices, soft, urgent. I crept to the hall and saw the glow of the living room. Ethan and Mara sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by open folders, wires coiled like veins. They weren't alone. On the laptop screen, multiple faces flickered in dim light. Other people, watching us, listening, nodding. Mara looked up, her eyes catching mine. "We told you. The house keeps secrets. We just share them." Ethan's voice was calm. "It's not about invasion. It's about intimacy, about belonging." Something in me snapped. My training, my boundaries, my sense of safety, it all collapsed into raw instinct. I walked forward, forcing my voice steady. "You think you know me?" I said. "You've read my words, stolen my stories, but you don't know me. You've never known me." Ethan smiled thinly. "Don't we?" Mara tilted her head. "You left the door open, and for one terrifying second I couldn't tell if she meant the front door, my bedroom door, or something deeper. My mind, my will, the parts of myself I thought untouchable." The screen flickered, more faces appearing. A dozen, maybe more, watching. The house hummed with a low vibration, as if its beams carried the weight of every secret spoken within. I don't remember what happened after that. I remember Natalie shouting, Josh pulling me back, folders scattering across the floor. When the police finally came, Ethan and Mara were gone. The wires were torn out, the screens dark. But sometimes, even now, I hear the house breathing when I try to fall asleep. I feel the weight of eyes on me in the quiet hours. And when my phone unlocks itself, or when I find a sentence in my journal, I don't remember writing. I wonder if they ever really left, or if the house found new tenants, because intimacy is a door. And once it's open, what if you can never close it again? I have always prided myself on being in control. Control of my body, my words, my decisions, my clients. When you're a therapist, people hand you their chaos like a dripping package they don't want to touch, and they expect you to hold it without flinching. I did. For years. My colleagues used to say I had a kind of steel in me, the kind that bent instead of breaking. But I think steel doesn't just bend forever. It thins. It wears, and if you press long enough, it snaps. That summer in 2017, I learned how easily control could slip. I moved into the Armitage Towers building in the Southern District, a high-rise that was built in the 70s and renovated poorly in the 90s. 21 stories, mostly young professionals, transient renters, and a few retirees who had lived there long enough to forget they had neighbors. The hallways were muffled, insulated so thickly that sound didn't carry, which I thought was a luxury at the time. Now I know better. Silence is not always safety. Silence is sometimes a wall that hides what no one wants to hear. I didn't move because of failure, though. I moved because I needed distance. My marriage was in that slow bleed stage where you don't even realize the cut is mortal until the body slumps. We weren't screaming or breaking things, we were dissolving. He wanted space, I wanted to keep working. So we paused, or that's what I told myself. My lease was month to month, temporary, a holding pattern until we decided what came next. The room came cheap, too cheap. The ad was clinical, nothing flowery. Armitage Towers, Unit 1509, one room available, looking for a reliable professional, non-smoker, must be discreet, rent negotiable. The man who answered the door introduced himself as Julian. I remember he had the air of someone who had already studied me, like a professor ready to correct a paper he hadn't assigned. He was in his late 30s, tall, dark hair trimmed with exactness, no wasted strands. His clothes were casual but coordinated, a black sweater, dark jeans, spotless shoes. He wore glasses, not wire-thin like the stereotype, but square frames. That made his gaze sharper. He didn't smile, not really. He observed, "You're Emily?" His voice was calm, almost bored. "Yes." "Therapist." I blinked. "How did you—" "It's in your email signature. You wrote me from your work account." That should have put me off, but he seemed harmless in his precision. And I was tired. I told myself, harmless, meticulous, maybe a little strange, but I could manage strange. The apartment itself was better than I expected. 15th floor, 2 bedrooms, open living space with glass doors leading to a narrow balcony. The furniture was sparse but curated, like he'd taken time arranging it, each piece deliberate. A single leather couch, a polished coffee table, Shelves lined with books that looked organized not by title or color, but something subtler, mathematical. A pattern I couldn't place. The bedroom he offered me had one wall of windows. The city glowed beneath, restless and sleepless, but the glass was thick and the silence complete. It unnerved me. Julian said one thing before I signed. There are boundaries. My office is off limits. It's the study, end of the hall. Please, respect that. The words were almost identical to something I'd heard once before in another life, but I didn't connect them at the time. I just nodded. Of course. At first, Julian was a ghost. Not in the supernatural sense. He was. They're tangible, but in his rhythm. He moved quietly, never interrupted, always in control of his presence. When we did cross paths, he was polite, direct, but he asked questions. Casual questions. Your sessions today ran late, yes? You skipped your Wednesday yoga? You called your husband last night, but he didn't answer. He never asked directly. He stated, correctly, it should have unnerved me. But as a therapist, I was used to people reading between my silences. Besides, I told myself he was observant. Just observant, until I started to notice the other things. On the third week, I came home to find a small box placed neatly outside my bedroom door. Inside was a miniature diorama, maybe 6 inches across. It showed a tiny living room nearly identical to ours. The same leather couch, the same coffee table, even a facsimile of the rug beneath. And on the couch, a figurine that looked like me, head tilted, book in hand. I laughed at first, nervous. You made this? Julian adjusted his glasses. It's a hobby. It looks like us. It is us. I waited for a smile. There wasn't one. After that, more appeared. Always at my door. A diorama of me in the kitchen stirring tea. Of me at the desk in my room writing notes. Of me on the balcony smoking, though I hadn't smoked in months. The details were precise. Too precise. I confronted him once. These are invasive. You're watching me. He tilted his head. I don't need to watch. Prediction is pattern. Human behavior isn't random. You, especially. You schedule your fears as carefully as your meals. That night, I locked my door. But the silence of the apartment made me wonder if locks meant anything at all. The complicating factor, the thing that kept me from leaving, was money. My husband and I were splitting accounts, and my savings were thin. Armitage Towers was cheap, almost suspiciously so, and Julian had lowered my rent without me even asking. When I hesitated, he said simply, I want stability. You're stable. Stable. That word was a leash. I couldn't afford to move. But things escalated. Slowly. Unbearably. One night I heard whispers. Not from Julian's study, but through the vents. A woman's voice, low, pleading. Then silence. When I confronted him, he looked puzzled, almost amused. You hear things that aren't there. Occupational hazard, isn't it? My face burned. Was it? Therapists are trained to trust perception, to parse delusion from fact. But the certainty in his tone hollowed me. Then came the second box. A diorama of my bedroom. The bed unmade. Lamp, tilted. And on the nightstand, a miniature of the knife I'd hidden in my drawer. No one knew about that knife. I told myself to leave, packed halfway. But when I opened my email, I found one from an anonymous account. A single image. Me, in my car, sitting in the parking lot outside my practice. Taken the day before. The subject, line, patterns. I froze. My first thought wasn't fear but recognition. He wants me to feel seen. I stayed. Julian's work unfolded gradually. Not blood, not murder. Something colder. He called it mapping. He was cataloging people. Their fears, their triggers, their collapses. His study, the one I wasn't allowed in, I glimpsed once through a half-open door. Walls lined with corkboards, photographs pinned with red thread, miniature dioramas stacked like archives. And in the center, a whiteboard filled with names. Mine was circled. When I finally broke, it wasn't dramatic. It was a Tuesday night. He set a box on the kitchen table without preamble. Inside, a diorama of the study itself. Only in this miniature, the walls weren't covered with strangers. They were covered with me. Hundreds of tiny photographs of my face, my hands, my body at angles I never knew were captured. "What is this?" I whispered. Julian adjusted his glasses. "A hypothesis." "About what?" "Control. How much can be taken before it is surrendered willingly." That was the moment I understood. He wasn't killing anyone. He was unraveling them. Patient by patient, subject by subject. I tried to leave that night. He blocked the door. Not violently, just stood there, calm, certain. "You won't go. Not yet. The experiment isn't finished. You don't own me." His gaze was steady. "Ownership is a fiction. Prediction is truth. Tomorrow you'll still be here." And damn him I was. The ending came weeks later, after I stopped sleeping. After I began hearing whispers not just through vents but in my dreams. He left another diorama, this one grotesque. Me lying on the floor, blood pooling, though I was uninjured. I smashed it, screamed at him, demanded he stop. He only studied me like I'd proven his point. That night, I forced the door to his study. The walls were worse than I imagined. Not just me, but dozens of others. Faces blurred, some marked with dates. Victims, though not dead, subjects. Notes scribbled. Dissociation at 47 days. Paranoia induced by 6 weeks. Compliance. Threshold. I realized then I wasn't the first. He found me there, trembling, reading. "Now you understand," he said quietly. "You're sick." "No, I'm exact." I raised the knife I'd hidden, my hand shaking. He didn't flinch. "Go on," he said. It would prove my final point. Even therapists become what they fear. I didn't stab him. I couldn't. Instead, I ran. I called the police, gave them everything. They searched the apartment weeks later. Found nothing. No dioramas, no photographs, no notes. His study was empty, clean, like it had never existed. Now, I check the building, sometimes online. Unit 1509 is still listed, rent negotiable. And sometimes when I wake at night, I see a box on my nightstand, a diorama of me sleeping. I don't know if it's real, but I can't bring myself to touch it, because I think if I do, it will prove his point. Control isn't lost, it's taken. And maybe, just maybe, I already surrendered mine. I should have known something was wrong the moment I shook his hand. There was nothing obvious, nothing anyone else would have noticed, just a faint tremor that didn't match his otherwise calm exterior, a tightness around his jaw that made his smile look rehearsed. But I was desperate, and desperation dulls instincts. The spring semester had just started, and I was scraping the bottom of every housing list within walking distance of campus. Prices were either obscene, or places had already been taken before. I even got the courage to call. Then I saw his posting. 3 blocks from campus, utilities included, rent split evenly, move-in ready. It felt like a small miracle, like someone had cracked a window open just when the air was about to run out. His name, or at least the one he gave me, was Stephen. Mid-20s maybe, thin, polite to the point of stiffness. He suggested we meet at a coffee shop downtown to go over the details. I remember sitting across from him at a small round table, steam rising from his untouched cup, while he asked me questions in his steady, almost clinical voice. What was my major? Did I like parties? Was I a night owl or early riser? Each answer I gave seemed to relax him, especially when I mentioned engineering. I said I kept to myself, didn't drink much, never had the time anyway. He nodded like that was exactly what he wanted to hear, emphasizing how much he valued peace and quiet in his space. That word, quiet, he used it 3 different times in a 10-minute conversation. I should have noticed how his fingers tapped against his thigh every time someone's phone buzzed nearby, or the way his shoulders tensed when the espresso machine hissed. But I was too busy thinking how perfect it all seemed. A clean, affordable place near campus. Barely any overlap in schedules since he worked nights at some pharmaceutical lab across town. I told myself the nervousness was just shyness, nothing more sinister. We shook hands that afternoon. His skin was cold and dry, his grip too long, like he didn't want to let go. The apartment itself was better than I expected. Third floor of an older brick building with tall windows that let in the late winter light. My room faced the street, noisy but bright. His faced the back alley, darker, quieter. He'd already been living there for 6 months, and it showed. Minimal furniture, no decorations, everything arranged with an order that felt unnatural, as though he'd measured the distance between objects before placing them. The only personal touch was a whiteboard by the door, where he left notes about bills or repairs. His handwriting was small, tight, controlled. For the first week, things went smoothly. Our paths barely crossed. He left for work around 9 at night, returned near dawn, made himself something to eat, then disappeared into his room to sleep. We exchanged polite greetings in passing. I thought I'd found the perfect setup, until the notes started. The first one came after my 6:45 a.m. alarm. A simple vibration, buzz and chime, nothing more. By the time I got out of the shower, a folded slip of paper was waiting on the floor, inside my room. Please consider vibration mode for alarms. Some of us are trying to sleep. Fair enough, I thought. He worked nights. I didn't want to be rude, but the vibration was worse. A dull rattling against my nightstand, carrying through the wall into his room. The next note was less polite. The vibration is worse than the sound. Must stop. I tried everything, placing my phone on a thick rubber mat, tucking it under my pillow, even buying one of those sunrise simulation alarms that woke you with light instead of sound. None of it mattered. The notes kept coming. Each one more insistent, written in that same cramped script. Soon they weren't just left under my door. I found them tucked into my textbooks, taped to my laptop screen, slipped inside a cereal box I'd just opened. The handwriting grew messy, erratic, the messages stranger. One read, "Every sound you make is recorded. Every single one." That's when I started noticing my electronics acting up. My laptop shutting off for no reason. My phone losing charge overnight even when plugged in. Headphones disconnecting mid-song. At first, I blamed faulty cords or cheap hardware. But part of me, some deeper part, knew it wasn't coincidence. The night everything unraveled, I'd been up late studying for a midterm. I finally collapsed around 2, setting 3 alarms. 6:30, 6:45, 7 tower. When I opened my eyes, the sunlight was too bright. My phone read 10:47. All 3 alarms were gone, deleted. I bolted upright, panic flooding me, knowing I'd missed the midterm. But before I could grab my bag, I tried the door. The knob turned, but the door wouldn't open. Something heavy was wedged against it from the outside. I slammed my shoulder into the wood. It didn't budge. Then the smell hit me. Gas. Thick, unmistakable, filling the air with invisible weight. I rammed the door again and again until something scraped across the floor and gave way. A metal bar clattered against the wall outside. I stumbled into the hall coughing, my chest tight. The kitchen was at the end. All 4 burners were on, flames off, just spilling gas into the apartment. I turned them off with shaking hands, threw open every window. Stephen's door was ajar, his bed perfectly made, room empty. But on his desk sat 3 spiral notebooks. I shouldn't have touched them, but I did. I opened the first and nearly dropped it. Logs. Pages and pages of logs. Every sound I had made in the apartment recorded, with timestamps. 3:47 a.m. Subject closed bathroom door too loudly. 11:23 p.m. Subject's typing speed indicates frustration. The second notebook was worse. Correction methods. Plans for dealing with people who broke his silence. Tampering with electronics. Sabotaging speakers. Loosening bolts on furniture. Cutting wires. Notes about me, detailed to the point of obsession. Calculations about the decibel levels of my footsteps. Diagrams of how sound traveled through the walls. The third notebook turned my stomach. Not logs, not plans. Fantasies. Violent, elaborate fantasies about punishing noisemakers. One described loosening the bolts on my desk chair so I'd hit my head when it collapsed. Another about contaminating my food to make me sick before an exam. The last entry, scrawled in large, jagged script, simply read, "Tomorrow morning, no more alarms ever." I grabbed the notebooks and ran into the street, calling 911 with shaking fingers. But here's where it turns. The police didn't find Stephen in the apartment. They didn't find him at the lab either. His workstation was empty, computer wiped clean. His supervisor said he'd clocked in that morning and then disappeared. It was as if he'd been waiting for the moment everything fell apart. And then came the package. 3 months later. No return address. Inside was my old phone, the one that had vanished from my nightstand weeks before the gas. It was empty except for one video. I almost didn't watch it, but I did. It showed me sleeping, filmed from inside my room. Time-stamped 3:47 a.m. In the last few seconds, barely visible in the corner, was a figure standing perfectly still inside my closet. I never showed it to the police. Never told anyone. What would be the point? He was gone, and deep down I knew that was his message to me. His way of saying goodbye. Or maybe not goodbye at all. Maybe it was a promise. These days I live alone. No roommates, no shared walls. I've removed the closet doors completely. Still, sometimes I wake at exactly 3:47 a.m. My heart pounding, my ears straining, listening. And in those moments, when the silence feels heavier than sound, I wonder if it was ever just about Stephen, or if the silence itself was what I should have feared all along. I never realized how quickly a home could turn against you, until the night I saw my own reflection in the dark screen of my laptop and swore there was someone else's face behind mine. Boston winters have a way of wearing you down. The kind of cold that gnaws through wool and down jackets, sneaks under scarves and stings your lungs like tiny knives. Last winter was worse than most. Relentless, bitter, and made crueler by the fact that I had nowhere stable to live. My last roommate had thrown me out after weeks of screaming matches, and what followed were 8 weeks of drifting, 8 weeks of couch cushions, the chlorine tang of gym showers, and living out of 2 battered suitcases that made me look more like a traveler who had overstayed her welcome than a nurse working brutal overnight shifts at Mass General. So when I saw the listing, a 2-bedroom near Alston, rent low enough that I blinked twice and checked for typos, I jumped on it. The man who answered, Nathan, looked harmless on our video call. Soft-spoken, hair perpetually mussed like he'd just woken from a nap, with the faintly hunched posture of someone used to computer screens more than people. He said he worked in cybersecurity, kept odd hours, didn't party, wasn't messy. He even offered to cut the deposit in half when I told him I was between paychecks. I thought I'd stumbled into luck at last. The apartment was forgettable, like most Boston rentals. Narrow hallways, creaky hardwood floors, radiators that hissed and clanged like they were angry about having to exist at all. But to me, it was a palace. My own room, my own key, a door I could lock. I moved in on a gray Thursday afternoon, bone-tired, and half delirious from back-to-back shifts, telling myself that things were finally stabilizing. The first weeks were ordinary to the point of dullness. Nathan kept to his room, slipping out occasionally for coffee or leftovers, always on his tiptoes, always ghost quiet. I noticed how soundless he was more than once, the way his presence seemed to arrive before I heard it. At the time, I chalked it up to consideration. With walls as thin as ours, every noise traveled. He was polite in a distant way, asking about my shifts, nodding along with my half-coherent replies. He helped me set up the Wi-Fi, insisting on configuring my laptop himself, so my settings were secure. I thought nothing of it. Grateful for a roommate who was quiet, clean, punctual with rent. But then came the flicker. The first time my laptop's webcam light blinked on, it was so quick I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Just a dying circuit. A 4-year-old machine on its last legs. I shrugged it off until it happened again. And again. The small green glow would wink at me like an inside joke. 1 second there, the next gone, while I typed patient notes or scrolled social media. Once it stayed on long enough for me to see the faint circle of light reflected in my glasses. I told Nathan about it one morning over burnt coffee. He perked up instantly, too instantly, reaching for my laptop before I'd finished explaining. "Driver issue, probably," he murmured, pale fingers brushing the keys with what felt like familiarity. I hesitated, clutching it tighter. Something in his eagerness unsettled me. I said I'd deal with it myself. For a flicker of a moment, his expression changed. Irritation, sharp and fast, before his face smoothed over into his usual half-smile. After that, my devices turned traitor. Login alerts appeared on my phone at odd hours, new sign-ins from states I hadn't visited, from devices I didn't own. My bank app locked me out after failed password attempts I hadn't made. My Spotify began looping songs I'd listened to days earlier at exactly 3 a.m., as though someone was staging a performance with my account. My Amazon cart filled with the exact items I had lingered over but never purchased. Thermal socks, a bedside lamp, a used paperback I'd considered. It was like someone was inside my thoughts, translating my hesitation into action. I doubled down on security. Complex passwords, 2-factor authentication, new email accounts. But no matter what I changed, the intrusions returned. My Instagram began following accounts about surveillance gear, posts of hidden cameras disguised as pens or smoke detectors, and then came the comments. Nathan began to know things he shouldn't. "Rough night," he'd say as I dragged myself in, eyes bloodshot. "4 hours of sleep isn't enough for you." My blood ran cold, because I had slept exactly 4 hours. Or he'd casually mention a patient I'd only written about in confidential notes on my laptop. Once, he laughed about the documentary I'd watched the night before, alone, with headphones on while he claimed to be out. I said as much, suspicion rising in my voice. He shrugged. "Walls are thin. Ventilation carries sound." But I remembered the pressure of my noise-canceling headphones, the absolute silence of my cocoon. He couldn't have heard anything. The dread came in pieces, small shards that didn't draw blood until they embedded too deeply to ignore. The breaking point was a Saturday. Nathan had left for the weekend, some kind of coding seminar. For the OM. First time in weeks I felt safe enough to deep clean, scrubbing corners, pulling furniture aside. That's when my hand brushed against something taped beneath my desk. A small USB drive wrapped tightly in black electrical tape. My heart stuttered. On an older laptop, one I rarely used. I opened it. Folders bloomed across the screen, each labeled with my name. Inside, screenshots of my emails, copies of patient notes, drafts of letters I'd never sent, browsing histories with timestamps. It was my mind, gutted and organized into neat digital autopsies. That discovery propelled me into frenzy. I tore through the apartment, checking fixtures, vents, mirrors. In the bathroom, the smoke detector looked newer, shinier. Standing on the toilet, I peered inside and froze. A lens, perfectly nestled between the slats. My stomach dropped so violently I nearly fell. With trembling hands, I dismantled it. Inside was a wireless camera, battery pack, transmitter, crafted with the precision of someone who had done this many, many times before. I wanted to vomit. All the showers, the moments of vulnerability, the tears no one was supposed to see. Every intimate fragment of my life was recorded. By the time I found the second device behind the living room mirror, then a third in my bedroom vent angled at my bed, my skin was crawling with the sensation of eyes. I packed what I could into my car, every nerve vibrating with terror. I planned to drive straight to the police, but my phone buzzed. A text from Nathan. Conference got canceled. Heading back early. Want me to grab dinner? My blood turned to ice. Minutes later, Your car's not here. Everything okay? Then, I see you were in my room. We should talk. The phone rang. His name lit up the screen over and over, each ring loud as a scream in the small cabin of my car. When I blocked him, the email started. I can explain everything. You're overreacting. I was just trying to keep you safe. Then the most chilling. I know where you are. I drove to the police station with my hands trembling so badly I could barely grip the wheel. The officer at the desk was skeptical until I showed him the photos, the USB, the camera in the smoke detector. His eyes darkened. A detective named Hang came in, sharp and quiet, scrolling through my phone with clinical precision. "This is sophisticated," she muttered. "He said he works in cybersecurity?" When I nodded, she looked at the officer. They sent a unit immediately. What they found in Nathan's room wasn't just incriminating, it was grotesque. Multiple monitors, each glowing with live feeds from hidden cameras throughout the apartment. Not just the ones I'd discovered, dozens more, invisible and intimate. Inside outlets, behind curtain seams, inside light fixtures. He had mapped the apartment into a theater of my existence. One screen even tracked my phone, showing my exact location at the police station. I knew something was wrong the very first night, though I couldn't have told you why. The silence in that apartment wasn't neutral. It had a weight to it, like the rooms were already occupied by something I couldn't see, some residue of a presence that hadn't left. I lay awake in the narrow bed I'd dragged into my new room, staring at the faint, jagged shadows of tree branches trembling against the ceiling, listening as the silence shifted from stillness to something heavier, like it was aware of me. My name is Megan, and 2 years ago when I was 26, I left behind the wreckage of a 6-year relationship and moved to Portland to start over. People like to describe their breakups as clean breaks, but mine was nothing of the sort. It was months of erosion, a slow disintegration I kept pretending I didn't notice. By the end, Ethan had me questioning everything about myself, my memory, my feelings, even my sanity. He had this way of dismissing things I knew were real. I'd tell him I'd heard him make a promise, and he'd tilt his head and smile faintly and say, "Babe, you're remembering wrong. You always do this." The worst part is, I started to believe him. When I finally left, I wasn't just walking away from him. I was walking away from the version of myself that trusted her own mind. So when the marketing agency offered me a job in Portland, I didn't hesitate. I packed my car with everything that fit, shoved the rest into storage, and drove north, the February air slicing cold through the cracked window. I told myself it was freedom, though it felt more like a half-stifled gasp, a flight rather than a step forward. I hadn't planned on living with a roommate. I wanted solitude. I wanted to be the kind of person who made tea at midnight and left books scattered across the floor without explanation. But then in the break room at work, in between the hum of the vending machine and the faint, bitter smell of burnt coffee, Natalie mentioned she was looking for someone to share her apartment. She worked in a different department, graphic design, I think. She had a quiet way of speaking, soft enough that I leaned closer without realizing it. Her hair was mouse brown, always tucked behind her ears, and she never seemed to meet my eyes for long. Polite, withdrawn, safe. That was what I thought. She felt like the opposite of Ethan, and that was enough for me to say yes. The apartment itself was an old brick building with uneven floors and tall windows that rattled when the wind pushed against them. When I stepped inside for the first time, it smelled faintly of sage and cat litter. Her cat Miso, a frail gray creature with mismatched eyes, darted out of sight as though I had intruded. The place felt lived in, but curated. Sparse furniture, clean counters, not a single thing out of place. I remember thinking that maybe her quietness came from a deep internal order. For the first few weeks, it was easy. We passed each other in the kitchen, exchanged small talk about weather and streaming shows, her cat, my migraines. At work, we barely interacted, which suited me fine. She never invited anyone over, never made noise late at night. Sometimes the apartment was so quiet I'd have to check to see if her bedroom light was on. It was exactly what I thought I wanted. No drama, no intrusion, no chaos. But silence changes when you live inside it. It grows teeth. The first thing I noticed was my red hoodie. It wasn't a special piece of clothing, not really. Just an oversized, soft, worn-in sweatshirt that I never wore outside but loved too much to throw away. One evening I went looking for it, couldn't find it, shrugged it off. Maybe I'd left it in my car. Maybe at the gym. Maybe even at Ethan's. The last time I'd gone to grab my things from his apartment, that hollow shell of a place where every mug and book had felt like an accusation. But 3 days later, the hoodie reappeared, folded neatly, placed at the back of my closet on top of a box I hadn't touched since moving. I stood staring at it for a long time, the back of my neck prickling. Had I put it there? Had I forgotten? I told myself not to be paranoid. Moving was messy. I was distracted, but the certainty that I hadn't touched that box was a weight pressing on my chest. Then it happened again. A necklace my mom had given me when I was 16, a small silver chain with a blue stone, vanished from my dresser. I tore the room apart, under the bed, behind the nightstand, inside my laundry basket, before finally giving up, heart thudding too hard. 2 days later, it was back. This time sitting on my nightstand, perfectly centered, as though someone had placed it with care. Then my earrings, my shoes, a book, always gone, always returned, always a little too neat, a little too deliberate. At first I thought I was losing it. Ethan used to say I was forgetful, careless, that I misplaced things, constantly. "You're imagining it," he would murmur when I swore I'd left my keys by the door. "You always make everything a bigger deal than it is." I could hear his voice again, months later, reverberating through my skull as I stared at my reappeared belongings. Maybe I was doing it again. Maybe I was inventing problems. But then there were the looks. Natalie never smiled much, never lingered in conversation. But sometimes I'd catch her eyes fixed on me, not glancing, watching. I'd walk into the kitchen and feel the weight of her stare, only for her to look away, stirring her tea. Once, when I reached for the sugar, I noticed she was humming softly. I froze. It was a melody I recognized. A song I had played in my room one night when I couldn't sleep. Something quiet from an old playlist Ethan used to tease me for loving. I had never heard her listen to it. I hadn't told her about it. But there she was, humming. The tune almost matching, but just slightly off, like she'd been practicing. That was the first time real fear entered me. Not confusion, not doubt, but fear. I tried to ignore it. Told myself I was being dramatic. But silence has a way of amplifying small things, and soon every moment with her felt like a performance I couldn't stop. The breaking point came one Friday afternoon. I left work early with a migraine, the kind that pulsed behind my eyes like a heartbeat. I didn't text Natalie. I assumed she was still at the office. But when I opened the front door, I heard movement, soft footsteps, from my room. I froze in the hallway, clutching my bag. The sound of my own pulse drowned everything else. Then Natalie stepped out of my bedroom. In her hand was my hairbrush. Her face twisted in shock before smoothing into something neutral. "Oh," she stammered. "I thought this was mine. Sorry." She pushed past me, her shoulder brushing mine, and shut her bedroom door. I couldn't move. I stood there in the hallway until my legs ached, clutching my bag as though it were a shield. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak in the building, every sigh of the pipes became her footsteps in my room. I thought of Ethan again, how he once scrolled through my phone when I was in the shower, then denied it, smiling faintly as he said, "You're paranoid, Meg. You always think people are out to get you." I thought of my desk, how sometimes it looked cleaner than I remembered leaving it. My hoodie folded, my necklace perfectly centered, my hairbrush in her hand. She hadn't just been touching my things, she had been studying them. Studying me by morning. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely pour coffee. That's when I ordered the camera. Small, motion activated, tucked onto my bookshelf behind a row of paperbacks. I told myself it was for peace of mind. But in truth, I already knew what it would show. It took less than a week. I went to dinner with a coworker and left the camera running. When I got home, I went straight to my phone, heart thudding like I'd swallowed it whole. The footage showed Natalie entering my room 15 minutes after I left. Not sneaking, not guilty. Calm, methodical, like she'd done it 100 times. She opened my drawers, held my clothes against her body, lifted a shirt to her face, inhaling, her eyes fluttering shut. And then she put on my mother's necklace, stood in front of my mirror, tilting her head, smiling softly. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't a joke. It was ritual. I couldn't stop, shaking. My body felt foreign, my skin wrong. She wasn't just invading my space. She was trying me on. The next morning, I searched her room while she was out. I told myself it was reckless, but I couldn't stop. I found a drawer in her nightstand with odd, specific objects. A hoodie the same shade as mine. A stone, blue and small, almost identical to the one in my necklace. A piece of paper torn from my journal, my handwriting copied clumsily beneath. Hers as though she'd practiced being me. And on her phone, tucked in a hidden album, a photo of me taken from the doorway of my room while I slept. My breath came so fast I thought I'd faint. I wanted to scream, to confront, to flee. But fear pinned me. If she was capable of this, what else was she capable of? So I pretended. I smiled in the kitchen, asked about her day, stirred my tea. She hummed that song again, her eyes flicking up to mine. That night I packed a bag and put it in my trunk. I forwarded the footage to my mom and my closest friend with a message. If anything happens, show this to the police. On Sunday I arranged to meet the landlord. I brought the video trembling, certain he would understand. But when I showed him, his eyes narrowed. "Are you sure?" he said. "Tenants exaggerate things sometimes. Maybe you left your door open. Maybe she was just checking." My chest went tight. He didn't believe me. He thought I was overreacting, just like Ethan always had. I was about to leave when I saw his face shift. He replayed the footage, his skin turning pale. "You can break the lease," he muttered finally, almost reluctantly. "No penalty." It felt less like protection than pity. On Monday, I waited until she was gone, then brought 2 friends to help me pack. We did it in under an hour. I left nothing behind, not even the mugs. Natalie never called, never texted. She didn't show up at work again. She just vanished, as though she'd dissolved into the silence. It's been 2 years and I still can't wear that necklace. It sits in a box buried under scarves. Every time I see it, I remember her reflection in my mirror, her head tilted, my necklace against her throat. She wasn't just stealing my things, she was stealing me. Sometimes I wonder if she's doing it again somewhere else. Sometimes I wake in the middle of the night certain the silence is breathing in my new apartment, too. That someone is just beyond the door, humming softly, waiting. And last week, when I dropped a pen and bent to pick it up, I froze. On the hardwood floor, half hidden by the radiator, was a small, smooth stone. Blue. Identical to the one from my mother's necklace. I don't know how it got there, and I don't know if I ever really escaped her. I was 19 when I first understood how easily the walls around you can shift from safe to strange. How a space you thought you owned can quietly betray you. It was the start of my sophomore year in upstate New York. I'd just moved off campus, into a narrow, drafty apartment that smelled faintly of mildew no matter how many candles I lit. The windows rattled with the wind. The floorboards groaned when I crossed them, as though the wood resented the weight of me. I wasn't supposed to live alone. The lease was too steep, the apartment too big. My new roommate was Kyle. At first I thought our meeting was random, pairing through one of those apps where students split rent. But later, much later, I'd come to question that. Back then, I thought he was normal, quiet, polite. a little too careful in how he moved, how he spoke, like every word had to be tested before leaving his mouth. He studied graphic design. He didn't smile much, but he was tidy, paid his share on time, didn't leave dishes stacked in the sink. The only thing that struck me as unusual, Kyle had a fixation with my clothes. At first, it was subtle. I'd come back from class, drop my bag, open my closet, and notice a shirt hanging where it hadn't been before. I assumed I'd misplaced it. But then I noticed the pattern. My sweaters hung together, arranged from darkest to lightest, even though I never sorted them that way. My jeans folded neatly on the shelf, seams lined up like he'd measured them. Even my socks were paired with more precision than I had ever managed. I told myself he was just neat. Maybe he'd brushed against my things while cleaning. Maybe I'd forgotten how I'd left them. But then it kept happening. Every 3 days or so, my closet would be transformed. Colors sorted, fabrics grouped. My clothes organized into a system I didn't understand, but he clearly did. I mentioned it, once laughing nervously. "You don't have to clean up my stuff, you know." He looked at me, calm, almost pleasant. "It feels better when things are in the right place." That was all. No further explanation. Just the steady gaze that made me feel like I'd missed something obvious. 2 weeks into living together, he was gone. One afternoon, I came home to find his side of the room completely empty. Bed stripped, closet bare, shelves cleared. His key sat on the kitchen counter. No note, no text, no goodbye. I called him. No answer. Texted. Nothing. It was like he'd slipped off the face of the earth. I convinced myself he'd dropped out. Maybe gone home, maybe transferred. The relief I felt surprised me. It wasn't that I disliked him. It was that his presence had always felt a little too heavy, like standing in a room where the air had no circulation. For months, the apartment was mine. I got a new roommate eventually, but he was rarely around. I learned to like the solitude. I wore my clothes the way I wanted, messy, unsorted, my closet a tangle of colors and textures again. It felt like reclaiming something I hadn't known was taken. And then December came. The night everything changed. I woke to the sound of the closet door creaking open. Snow fell outside, soft against the window pane. I had gone to bed past midnight, headphones in, white noise masking the moan of wind. But some instinct cut through it all, the sense that I wasn't alone. I slipped out, the earbuds. The room was silent except for the steady creak of the closet hinge, and when I turned my head, Kyle was there. He looked thinner, gaunt, shadows sunk deep beneath his eyes. His hair was greasy, his oversized army green jacket stained at the sleeves. His skin looked waxy, stretched too tight over bone. He didn't acknowledge me. He was inside my closet. My clothes, my sweaters, dresses, coats were draped over his arms. He was sorting them carefully, smoothing fabric with the tips of his fingers, hanging them back one by one in a new order only he understood. My throat locked. I watched frozen. Finally, I whispered, "Kyle, what are you doing?" He paused, a black scarf dangling from his hand. Slowly, he turned his face toward me. His eyes were flat, lifeless, but behind them burned a quiet conviction. "Just fixing it, you messed it up." A chill slid through me. I told him he didn't live here anymore, that he'd left months ago, that he couldn't just come back. He tilted his head slightly, like I'd said something nonsensical. "This is mine. You wore it wrong, you folded it wrong. It has to be the way it was." He placed the scarf back, smoothed the sleeves of my coat, and shut the closet door with a gentle click. Then he turned to me. "Where are my sketchbooks? The E?" Words were sharp, sudden. I stammered that I didn't have them, that he must have taken them when he left. He stared at me for a long moment, then stepped into the corner of the room, sat on the floor and hugged his knees. That's when I slipped out of bed, trembling, phone in hand. I stepped into the hallway, closed the door, and called campus security. While I waited, I pressed my ear against the wood. Inside, I heard him humming. Not a melody, not words. just a low, off-key drone, like something ancient vibrating through the air. When security arrived, we opened the door together. Kyle was lying in my bed, covers pulled neatly to his chin, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. He didn't blink when they called his name, didn't move when they tugged the blanket back. He just kept humming. They lifted him out of the bed, and he followed quietly. No resistance, no anger, as though his body belonged to someone else. One of the guards found a folded piece of paper under my pillow, a pencil sketch, not of the room's layout, but of my closet. Every item of clothing drawn in shaky detail, sorted into the exact system he had created. In the margins, over and over, he'd written, "This is where I belong." That night I couldn't stay. I packed a bag and slept on a friend's couch until winter break. The university let me break my lease. My new roommate moved out too, spooked by the story. I thought it was over, but it wasn't. Because even before, that night I'd noticed something else, a smaller detail I hadn't wanted to admit. Every few mornings I'd woken to find a small object placed on my pillow, a pebble, a twig, once a single button. Always something ordinary, but out of place. I had blamed myself. Maybe it had fallen from a pocket, maybe I'd tossed it in my sleep. But after Kyle, I knew better. He'd been in my room before that night, standing over me while I slept, leaving tokens, quiet reminders that I wasn't alone. Months passed. Spring turned to summer. I transferred schools, moved to a new city, rented a new apartment with locks I checked twice every night. I thought distance would dissolve him. And then, one humid night in June, I came home to my new place, kicked off my shoes, and dropped my keys on the counter. I went to my bedroom, tossed my bag on the chair and froze. On my pillow, perfectly centered, lay a single item, not a pebble, not a twig. It was my old red sweater, the one Kyle used to hang at the far left of the closet, always in that spot, no matter how many times I moved it. It smelled faintly of him, dust, sweat, something metallic underneath. And in that instant, the truth pressed down on me. Kyle wasn't gone, he wasn't behind, he was already here. The first time I smelled the lavender, I thought I was dreaming. Not the sweet, delicate kind you find in scented candles or fresh-cut bouquets, but a sharp, artificial lavender, too strong, too sudden, clinging in the air like smoke. I woke, in the middle of the night, to find my room filled with it so thick it coated the back of my throat. My first thought was fire, or chemicals, but when I sat up, there was no smoke, no spray bottle, no candle, just the smell. And standing in the dark, listening to my own pulse pound in my ears, I could swear someone had just been there. I told myself it was nothing, that it was in my head. That's what I always did at the beginning. I was a junior at a small university in Oregon, trying to juggle too many things, classes, a part-time job at the student library, the constant math of how to stretch a few $100s into a month's worth of rent and groceries. I just moved off campus, desperate for independence, but also because the dorms felt suffocating and expensive. I couldn't afford to be picky. When I saw a post on the student message board offering a room in a 2-bedroom apartment close to campus, I clicked so fast my hands shook. The guy renting the other room was named Jordan. His ad was short. Decent price, looking for someone quiet and respectful. That was it. I met him in the parking lot one gray afternoon. He was taller than me, but not imposing. Polite, distant, a little stiff. He shook my hand like it was an interview. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. He showed me the apartment, which was clean to the point of sterility. His room looked like no one lived there. A bed, a desk, a small bookshelf lined only with law textbooks and a Bible. No posters, no scattered laundry, no personality. I remember hesitating for half a second in the doorway, staring at how bare it all was, before telling myself that was good. A quiet, clean roommate was exactly what I needed. No drama, no noise. I moved in 2 weeks later. At first, everything seemed fine. Jordan was quiet. He worked evenings at a print shop downtown, so our schedules rarely overlapped. He paid rent, on time. He wiped down the counters after he cooked. He never left dishes in the sink. He never blasted music or invited strangers over. Sometimes we exchanged nods in the kitchen, maybe small talk about the rain, but that was it. I told myself I'd lucked out, but then came the lavender. The first time, I woke at 3:07 a.m., my nose burning with the smell. I sat up, heart racing, but the apartment was silent. No movement. I pressed my face into my pillow, but the scent was in the pillow, in the sheets, in my skin. When I finally drifted back to sleep, I dreamed of fields, lavender fields, endless rows stretching into the horizon. But when I bent to touch them, the stems were knives. The next morning, the apartment smelled normal. Jordan was in the kitchen, making coffee, his expression flat but polite. "Morning," he said, as if nothing had happened. I didn't mention the smell. I told myself it must have been a dream, but it happened again and again, always at night, always when I was asleep, and always followed by this eerie silence like the whole apartment was holding its breath. I tried to brush it off. People light candles. People use air fresheners. But I never saw any in the apartment. When I asked casually once if he liked lavender, he just looked at me confused and said no. After that, I noticed other things like the music. I'd come home from class or work, unlock the door, and hear a faint song playing from his room. Not loud, not enough to be obvious, just a single melody line, tinny through his old speaker. Always the same song. A slow, haunting piano tune that sounded half-finished, like it was missing chords. The first few times I brushed it off. People leave music playing. But when I knocked once to tell him it was on, the music stopped instantly. Dead silence. No footsteps, no voice. Just gone. And when I asked him about it later, pretending to be casual, he tilted his head slightly and said, "I don't listen to music." The words were so simple, so flat that I laughed nervously like it was a joke. But he didn't laugh. That was when I realized something was wrong. I wanted to tell someone, anyone, but what was I supposed to say? That my roommate's room smelled like lavender when he wasn't there? That I heard music no one admitted to playing? I had no proof. And I couldn't just break the lease. The rent was low for the area, and my parents were barely helping. I was trapped. The weeks bled together in a haze of unease. I started stacking my pillows in a very specific way when I left, just to see if they'd been moved. Some nights, I came home and found them shifted slightly off as though someone had sat there. My locked door would sometimes be ajar. The lavender smell would cling to the air for hours, even when no one else was home. Finally, I forced myself to bring it up. A Sunday afternoon, the only time we were both home. I tried to laugh, make it sound like a joke. "Hey, remember that night you came into my room with the knife? That freaked me out." He didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. He just stared at me for a beat too long before saying flatly, "My mom said I used to do weird stuff in my sleep. Sometimes I'd scream, sometimes I'd hit walls. It's just something I've always had." Then, after a pause, he added, "But don't worry, I've got it under control now." The words felt rehearsed, like a line he'd said before. That night I shoved my desk against the door. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, every sound magnified. Around 2:40 a.m. I heard it. Soft footsteps pacing in the hall outside my room. Then they stopped. 2 knocks. Gentle. And then nothing. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I clutched my phone with 911 typed in, thumb trembling over the call button. He didn't speak. I swear he just stood there, waiting. It felt like an eternity. Before the footsteps receded, the next morning I smiled like nothing had happened. But when he left for work that night, I packed a bag and checked into a cheap motel off campus. I told him I was staying with my girlfriend, though I didn't have one. I stayed there for days, trying to figure out what to do. Breaking the IOM lease wasn't an option. Telling the landlord would get me nowhere. Jordan hadn't technically done anything illegal. And the police? What would I even say? That my roommate smelled like lavender and played ghost songs when I wasn't home. I started asking around. Do you know Jordan? At first, people shrugged. Then one guy in my psychology lecture, Ben, pulled me aside. His voice was low, urgent. Wait, you live with Jordan? You need to be careful. He told me Jordan had lived in the dorms 2 years before, that he'd been kicked out after several incidents, screaming in the middle of the night, banging on doors with broom handles, sitting outside people's rooms for hours. Another girl whispered that she'd filed a complaint. She said Jordan had stood outside her building night after night, staring up at the windows. That was enough. I went back to the apartment while he was at work, packed everything I could carry and left. I blocked his number, changed my email, moved into a cramped studio with paper-thin walls and a rattling heater. It was awful. But I slept. For a while, because even after months, the lavender followed me. Some nights I'd wake with it thick in the air, stinging my throat. And once, just once, I came home and heard that faint piano song playing inside my studio apartment, though I lived alone. I froze in the doorway, heart pounding, before fumbling for the light. Silence. Nothing was there. But I keep wondering, what if Jordan wasn't sleepwalking at all? What if the lavender, the music, the knocks, what if they weren't accidents but signatures? His way of marking where he'd been, and what if he still is? Because some nights, when I wake in the dark with lavender in my lungs, I swear I see the outline of someone standing at the foot of my bed, not moving, not breathing, just waiting. And every time I have to ask myself, is this the night he finally stops pretending? I was 32 when the walls started breathing around me, though at the time I thought it was just my life collapsing. It's strange. When you're younger, you imagine ruin as an explosion. A screaming match, a slammed door, a shattered glass on the kitchen floor. But when my marriage died, it was a silence so thick it pressed on my chest like a weight. My wife and I became two shadows circling the same house without touching. Our 4th anniversary passed with no words. A month later, we signed the papers. In under an hour, she left first. I stayed behind in the house we'd bought together, sorting through receipts and cracked mugs and half-dead plants that refused to die even when we did. I thought I'd feel relief locking the door for the last time. All I felt was cold. I couldn't go home to my parents, not with their gentle questions I wasn't ready to answer. My friends had families, kids, cramped apartments. And at work, layoffs came in waves and I felt the surf pulling at my ankles every day. I couldn't gamble on a lease. My savings were bleeding away too fast. So I did what desperate people do. I went on Craigslist. The ad was short. Furnished room. Private bath. Quiet house. $800, all utilities included. Too cheap. Suspiciously cheap. But the photos looked real. Hardwood floor, big window, clean bed. A little too neat, like it wanted me to trust it. I emailed. Within the hour, a man named Alan replied, "Rooms available, come by tonight." The house was in the southeast corner of the city, tucked into a neighborhood where trees grew tall and thin, leaning over the sidewalks as though sharing secrets. The house itself looked like it had belonged to the street for 100 years. Pale gray siding, white trim, solid, unmoving. Alan met me at the door. He was in his late 50s, silver hair slicked back, his face lined but composed. His voice was low, rough, softened by cigarettes. He shook my hand firmly, his palm dry and warm. The room was nicer than I expected. Ground floor, queen bed, couch under the window, attached bathroom. It felt temporary, but not unsafe. No lease, Alan said. Month to month, people come and go, that's life now. He told me there were other tenants, a young German couple upstairs, and in the basement gym. Quiet kid, he said. Keeps to himself. That should have been the first red flag. But I was tired. I handed him a bank draft that night. I moved in 2 days later. The German couple, Marta and Felix, were sweet, eager to practice their English. They invited me to dinner my first night, spaghetti with too much garlic. They couldn't have been older than 22, still wide-eyed with optimism. "How long have you been here?" I asked. "About a month," Felix said. "And you're already leaving?" The look they exchanged was heavy. "It's not the house," Marta whispered. "It's someone downstairs." "Jim?" Felix said. "What about him?" They hesitated, Marta's voice barely above a whisper. "He's strange. He watches." I laughed nervously, but the knot in my stomach tightened. They left 3 days later, loading their boxes into an Uber. Alan waved them off like a proud father. When the door shut, the house felt emptier, its air colder. That night I first heard the music. Not loud, just a hum of synths and bass lines rising through the floorboards. It was constant, like a machine running endlessly in the dark. I met Jim a week later. I was reheating leftover pizza when he appeared in the kitchen, barefoot, so quiet he startled me. He was younger than I expected. Mid-20s, pale, lanky, his beard patchy. His hair looked like he'd cut it himself, uneven tufts sticking out. "I'm Nora," I said, forcing a smile. "Jim." His voice was flat, almost monotone. He filled a glass of water, drank it slowly, his eyes fixed somewhere over my shoulder. "How long have you lived here?" I asked. He didn't answer, just shrugged. "What do you do?" "Nothing." He slipped back downstairs like smoke. I told myself he was just awkward. Not everyone is made for small talk. But then the police came. 2 knocks, sharp, deliberate. "Police, open up." My stomach turned to stone. I cracked the door, and 2 officers stood there. "Your housemate Jim reported items stolen." One said, "He suspects you." I laughed too loud. "Me? I barely know him." They asked to search my room. I agreed. I had nothing to hide. But they found things. His wallet, earbuds, a flash drive, all stuffed into a shoebox in my closet I hadn't touched. "I didn't put those there," I said, my chest tightening. They didn't arrest me, but their eyes told me they didn't believe me. When they left, I sat on my bed for hours, trembling. I understood then Jim planted them, but why? The next morning I knocked on his door. No answer. Just the endless hum of music. I started living like a fugitive. Chair under the doorknob at night. Quick showers with the door open. Granola bars instead of cooking. The house creaked constantly, as if listening. One night I woke to the sound of my handle turning. Click, jiggle. I grabbed a book, yanked the door open. Jim stood there, his eyes wide. "Sorry," he muttered. "Wrong door." "Don't ever come near my room again," I snapped. He slunk away. I called Alan the next morning, told him everything. "I'll talk to him," he said, calm. "But it's a shared house. You've got a lock. That's all I can offer." His indifference made me colder. But then things changed. The music grew louder. I started hearing whispers underneath it. Words I couldn't make out. And one night, I found a note slipped under my door. "You don't belong here. The house keeps what it needs." I froze. My hands shook so badly I couldn't hold the paper. That same night I went upstairs to use the shared laundry. The machines rattled in the dim light. On the wall above them were faint scratches layered over each other. Names. Dozens of names carved into the paint. I traced one with my finger. Marta. Another. Felix. And older ones. Names I didn't recognize. Felt dizzy. The house wasn't just a house, it was collecting people, and Jim wasn't random. He cornered me a few days later in the kitchen. His eyes were wide, pupils blown. "You need to leave," he whispered. "Why? What do you want?" "It's the house, don't you hear it? It traps people, keeps them. I'm helping you, driving you out, saving you." My throat closed. "You planted those things. You called the cops." His lips twitched. So you'd run. But you're still here. You're already in its story. That night I dreamed of footsteps pacing my room. When I woke, there was dirt on my floor, damp, earthy, like someone had walked through soil and stood by my bed. The house groaned constantly. The music never stopped. And Alan, he wasn't innocent. I overheard him one evening outside my door speaking low to Jim. "She's close," he said. "She doesn't listen," Jim answered. "Then she stays," Alan said. I didn't breathe until they left. I started searching. One afternoon when Alan was out, I crept into the basement. The air was damp, thick. The music was louder there, pulsing from speakers stacked against the wall. But it wasn't just music. It was a recording, a loop of voices layered under the synths, crying, whispers, pleading. On a desk, I found notebooks, dozens of them, each one filled with entries about tenants. March 2017, Aaron, jobless, stayed 3 months before breaking. July 2019, Claire, left after 6 weeks, house didn't take her. April 2022, Marta and Felix, too soft, easy, driven out. And the last entry, October 2023, Nora, divorce, fragile, collecting her collapse. My stomach dropped. I slammed the notebook shut. But in that silence, I realized the music had stopped. Jim was standing in the doorway. His eyes glowed with something I couldn't name. "You weren't supposed to see that," he whispered. "What do you want from me?" My voice cracked. "Your story. Everyone leaves a story. The house feeds on them. It keeps them." He stepped closer. "You can go, but only if you give it yours." "I don't understand." "You already do," he said. "The marriage, the job, the loneliness. You're perfect. The house writes itself through us. I just help it finish." He smiled, then not cruel, almost tender. I bolted, ran upstairs, locked my door, heart hammering. That night I didn't sleep. When I finally left the house for good, I didn't look back. I moved into a studio across town. Thin walls, ancient plumbing, but mine. A month later, I went back once against all reason. I told myself I just wanted closure. The house was dark, empty. A for rent sign staked in the lawn. I slipped inside. My old room smelled of dust, but under the bed, taped to the frame, I found a notebook. Its pages were filled with handwriting I recognized as Jim's. Each page held a tenant's name, their unraveling written in chilling detail. And on the last page, under my name, was a line that froze me. "She thinks she escaped, but the house is already inside her." Now some nights when the city goes quiet, I hear it. That low hum of synths and whispers underneath, waiting for the story to finish. I never liked the way the walls at Lark Ridge felt at night. They pressed in too close, holding a kind of damp silence that no one else seemed to notice. Not the kind of silence you get in a normal building, where you can still hear water running, in the pipes, a truck outside, or someone snoring down the hall. This silence was thick, padded, like the air had been sucked out on purpose. Even in the summer, the walls gave off a chill that burrowed under your skin and stayed there. I was already used to cold places, courtrooms, the back of cop cars, the fluorescent offices where some overpaid woman with a tight smile and a legal pad told me I could do better if I just tried. Everyone at Lark Ridge probably had their version of that story, but mine was simple. I wasn't the easiest kid. I had a temper I didn't know how to turn off. I'd fought a girl in my grade, so badly she left with a split lip and a chipped tooth. I shoplifted, not even big stuff, just candy, nail polish, a box of lighters once because I liked flicking the flame. I skipped school whenever the walls made me feel trapped. So the judge decided Lark Ridge was a better alternative to juvie. Structure without confinement, they called it, which really meant they locked us up without bars. The staff weren't cruel, but they weren't exactly human either. Tired faces, tired voices. They gave us 3 meals, assigned chores, ran group therapy circles. They tucked us into bed with a 10 p.m. lights out curfew and never pretended to care. The other girls didn't talk much about their reasons for being there. You learned quickly not to ask. Not unless you wanted the same question turned back on you. 3 weeks after I arrived, they moved me into a new room. My first roommate got transferred. They replaced her with a girl named Eli. I didn't like her the second I saw her. Not because she was mean, because she wasn't anything. Thin, so thin it made me uncomfortable, with wrists like twigs poking out of the sleeves she always dragged halfway down her hands. Dark hair cut blunt, falling over her face like a curtain. She never looked straight at me. Her eyes darted sideways like she was always trying to focus on something standing just over my shoulder. The counselors told me she'd been there a few months. She came from a situation best left alone. That exact phrase. The kind of phrase that isn't really an answer at all. That first night I decided I wasn't going to make it easy for her. I'd grown up fighting. When new kids tried to act tough, I shoved back harder. It was better to make them afraid of me than the other way around. So when she ignored me, didn't even introduce herself, I snapped. "Hey," I said, sharp. "You gonna pretend I don't exist? That how this is gonna go?" She lifted her head just barely, and for a second I thought she was going to mouth off. Her lips moved like she was starting to form words, but then her gaze slipped past me again, up toward the corner of the ceiling. And she whispered, so soft I almost didn't catch it. "Not now. Not to me. To whatever she thought was behind me." I felt stupid suddenly, like I'd thrown a punch at air. I turned over in my bed, muttering something about freaks, but I didn't sleep much, because that was when I heard her whispering. Not the restless mumble of dreams, not nonsense syllables. Full sentences, careful pauses, like she was answering someone who wasn't there. At first I thought she was talking to me, that maybe she was crazy enough to think I'd keep her secrets. I sat up on one elbow listening, but I couldn't catch the words except one. Downstairs. The next morning she acted like nothing happened. Didn't even acknowledge me when I shoved past her to get to the bathroom sink. The thing was, my old self, the bad kid, the one who'd stolen and fought, she wanted to push it. She wanted to grab Eli by the wrist, shove her against the wall, and demand to know what the hell she was doing in the middle of the night. But every time I looked at her, I lost my nerve. It wasn't fear, not exactly. More like my instincts told me that whatever she was tied up with, it wasn't the kind of fight I knew how to win. It kept happening. Every night around 2 or 3, the whispers started again. Sometimes I thought I heard another sound, lower, almost buried under hers. Not her voice. Something rougher, more jagged, like wood splintering. When I finally asked her about it casually, "You were talking in your sleep last night?" She shrugged and said, "I don't remember dreaming." Then she left before I could press. That was when the door started acting strange. I closed it tight every night. Every morning it was cracked open. At first I thought maybe staff were checking in, so I wedged one of my textbooks against the bottom. The next morning the book had been nudged aside. When I asked Eli, she blinked like I was speaking another language, mumbled, "Staff checks in." But we both knew that wasn't true. So I decided to catch her. That Saturday, I skipped movie night, pretended to be asleep when she came back from dinner. At 11:45, she sat up, stiff and sudden, like someone had yanked her upright by invisible strings. She climbed out of bed barefoot and went straight to the door. Didn't even check if I was awake. Just slipped into the hallway. I counted to 50, 2, then followed. The building was quiet. Night mode lights painted the hallway in sickly yellow. The silence pressed into me, thick as cotton. I crept past the bathrooms, past the game room, toward the stairwell, and there she was, standing at the bottom of the stairs facing the basement door. The knob turned on its own. The door creaked inward, slow as if it had been waiting. Nobody on the other side. Eli stepped through without hesitation. My old instincts kicked in then. The part of me that always threw punches, always stole the thing just because someone said I couldn't. The part that said, "I'm not scared of anything." So I went after her. The air in the basement felt wrong immediately. Stale, like it hadn't moved in years. It smelled of mold and rust, like wet coins in a jar. The hallway was narrow, the concrete walls darker than upstairs, like they'd been painted and repainted trying to seal something inside. A flickering bulb lit the far end, throwing jagged shadows. I followed the sound of her bare feet. A door stood ajar at the end. Inside, Eli pressed both palms flat against the wall, whispering in a rush. The words tumbled over one another, desperate, urgent, and then I heard it. The second voice. It wasn't just a sound, it was a wound tearing open in the air. A dry grinding noise like rusted hinges forcing themselves apart. A rasp that slid into my bones and set my teeth aching. It said one word. Stay. The force of it rattled inside me. My stomach clenched like I was going to vomit. My jaw ached, as if the sound had shaken my molars loose. My skin prickled raw, and for one awful moment, I almost did what it said. Then I turned and ran. I bolted upstairs, slammed the basement door shut behind me, and nearly ripped the night guard's office door off its hinges. Words tumbled out. Eli, the basement, the voice. He looked irritated at first. You dreamin', kid? But then he sighed, grabbed his flashlight, and muttered, Fine. Let's go check. Teach you a lesson. He disappeared into the basement. I sat in the hallway, knees pulled to my chest, shaking. 10 minutes. 15. When he came back up, his face wasn't just pale. His eyes were wide, staring at nothing, pupils blown out. His hands wouldn't stay still. He kept rubbing them against his pants like he was trying to wipe something off. There's no one down there, he said, voice flat. Then he walked away without another glance at me. I didn't sleep that night, and in the morning, Eli was gone. Staff claimed her mother picked her up, case closed. But I'd sat by the front window pretending to read. No car came, just a van that dropped off a new girl later that afternoon. When I checked the filing cabinet in the common room, her intake folder was gone, like she'd never been there. But the sound of that second voice stayed with me, the way it clawed into my teeth, my stomach, my bones, the way it made me want to obey. And deep down I knew the worst part wasn't that Eli disappeared. The worst part was that whatever she'd been talking to hadn't stayed in that basement. It had noticed me. I kept telling myself I could put it behind me, that what happened in that basement was just another stupid decision in a long line of them, the kind of thing I'd laugh about one day. That's what I'd always done, shrug off the bad choices, act tougher than I felt, let everyone think I was fearless. It was a habit carved out of necessity when I was younger. Back then, if someone pushed me, I pushed harder. If a teacher threatened detention, I made sure the entire class laughed while I earned it. If my mom's boyfriend tried to talk down to me, I cut him off mid-sentence and made him look small. I knew I couldn't win every fight, but I could, at least convince people I wasn't afraid of them. That armor carried me through middle school and high school and half the garbage that came after. It was that same armor that got me into the basement in the first place. Eli had felt like a challenge, not a danger. I remembered the moment I first thought about shoving her just to see what would happen, something I'd done 100 times, to girls like her when I was younger. Only she didn't react like anyone else. She didn't flinch or square up. She tilted her head like she was listening to someone whispering behind me. That tiny, wrong reaction caught me off guard, and for a second it felt like I was the one being sized up. I should have walked away. Instead, I doubled down because that's who I've always been. I wasn't scared of her, I wasn't scared of anything except I was. Now. The voice hadn't just echoed in my head, it had pressed down on me like gravity thickening until my bones rattled. Stay wasn't just a sound, it had texture. It was a grinding, rusted hinge pulled against stone, a rasp that burrowed into my teeth and made my molars ache. My skin broke out in goosebumps, but deeper than that, my stomach clenched like I'd swallowed something spoiled. The air itself tasted metallic, like biting a coin. And it wasn't just the word. After I bolted upstairs, before the door slammed, I swear I heard something else behind it. Half-formed syllables like it had been speaking through broken glass. Not done. That should have been enough to keep me away for good. But the basement didn't leave me alone. It followed me in small ways. Subtle ways. The next time I saw the night guard, I noticed it. The first night, he'd looked at me strange. Sure, but this was different. His eyes wouldn't stop blinking, rapid little twitches like his body was trying to erase what it had seen. Every few seconds, his hands brushed down the front of his pants, like he couldn't get rid of something, sticky on his palms. He never said a word about the basement, not to me, not to anyone. But when I caught his gaze, it was like looking at someone who'd touched a hot stove and was still pretending his hand didn't burn. One night, I asked him outright, "You've been down there, haven't you?" He froze, his whole body stiffening, like a startled animal. Then he shook his head, too fast, too rehearsed. "Nothing down there, just storage. You shouldn't ask about it." But his jaw clenched so tight the muscles twitched and his hand kept brushing against his pants. That was when I realized the thing in the basement didn't just want me. It wanted anyone who got close enough to hear. I started digging, which is another bad habit of mine. Can't leave things alone. Can't just let sleeping monsters lie. I thought maybe if I knew what the building had been before, I could explain away the stale air, the painted-over walls, the whispers. The library kept a thin pamphlet tucked in the local history section, half forgotten and curling at the edges. The building had once been part of a sanatorium. Not the glamorous kind you see in old photos with grand porches and clean white sheets. No, this one had been a stopgap, a state-funded holding site for patients they didn't know what to do with. People with tuberculosis. People considered unstable. People they wanted out of sight. It wasn't open long. The pamphlet didn't say why it shut down, just that most records had been lost in transfer. But there was one blurry picture of the basement level before it was repurposed. The stonework looked identical. Even the painted-over door frame was visible. Only back then it had led to a padded observation room. The caption mentioned a patient known only as ES. No records, no family, no release date. Something about that detail stuck with me. No name, no ending. Just initials sealed away underground. That night, when I lay in bed trying to convince myself I was imagining it all, I heard it again. Not with my ears, inside. A low scrape against my skull, a word rasped out in that same metallic hinge voice. "Not done." I jolted up so fast my blankets tangled around me. My first thought was that I'd brought it home with me, but then my eyes adjusted to the dark and I saw something worse. My closet door was open. Just a sliver, just wide enough to notice. I always shut it. Always. I forced myself out of bed, slammed it closed, and pressed my back against it until my heartbeat slowed. But when I finally turned to climb back under the covers, I saw it. On the fresh paint of my bedroom wall, paint I'd rolled on myself only a week ago, was a handprint. Too high for me to have made by accident. Too sharp at the fingertips, like the nails had dragged downward. The paint hadn't smudged. It had sunk into the surface, darker than the rest, like it had been waiting underneath all along. And I realized something that made my chest cave in with dread. I hadn't escaped. The basement, I'd let it out.